FlexSNG, and I find it personally really interesting in the sense that gasification processes cost in the hundreds of millions of dollars to implement. So little risks become big risks, and it's such a privilege to be involved with one that's on its way up that TRL scale. And so that's the idea today, is to talk a little bit about that progression from TRL 5 heading towards the real world with some world-class players. And we're going to start with one this morning. Our keynote speaker is David Longden, who got his PhD in bioenergy systems at Aston University in the UK. And he's part of the European Union Bioenergy Network of Excellence starting in 2007, and has worked on gasification, various gasification and thermochemical conversion technologies over the last 18 years, including small companies like Valmet, a company many of us know like Enerchem, Energos, and Compact Power, and spent a significant part of his career developing gasification projects throughout the UK. So his current position is Strategic Business Development Manager at Sumitomo Foster Wheeler's recently formed Circular Carbon Division, and he's responsible for the growth globally of its gasification business, focusing on project and solution development in partnership with world-leading synthesis and technology partners like FlexSNG. So with no further ado, David, take it away.
Paul, thank you very much for that very kind and thorough introduction to myself this morning. I'm delighted to be talking to you all at the BIOFOR conference for PaperWeek, live from Greenwich in London. So I'm on GMT on the prime meridian, but delighted to be delivering this keynote on the state of the art biomass and waste gasification. It's been a long time coming, and why we now really firmly believe that it is the right time. So just for the duration of the keynote, I'd just like to go over the structure with you, which I'd like to present today. First, a bit of an introduction to SHI-FW, or SFW as we abbreviate ourselves. Then I'd like to talk to you about the story from the 1980s of this great Finnish gasification story, the history and the key references that have been done. A little bit about SFW specific technology to distinguish it perhaps from others that you might know. The combination of the experience with the N.Sc Biofuels demonstration project, where we demonstrated biomass gasification to Fischer-Tropsch crude wax. And then going to the UK market, where I'm based, and I have a good understanding where things started to go wrong in 2010. But then going into the 2020s, where we've found a new awakening and a change in perspective, which I think has been absolutely critical to finding ourselves in the exciting position that we are today. Celebrating some of the very recent key milestones and achievement, which incidentally has actually been seen to be from the pandemic and accelerating more. And then what we're doing now, 2024 onwards, and what we're focusing on, the collaborations that we have and the innovations, etc., and thus concluding why we believe the time is now. So a little bit about SFW. Yeah, we provide energy and environmental technologies mostly to the energy and power sectors, with over 1,800 people based in over 15 countries worldwide. We were bought back in 2017 by Sumitomo Heavy Industries, who has built and owned and has on license our fluidized bed combustion technology for the Asia markets. And we're very lucky to have them with their very strong balance sheet to support us in realising biorefinery projects. But nevertheless, we still have our roots very much in Alstom, Finnish company, and Foster Wheeler, of course, from the USA, with our head office in Espoo in Helsinki. And we've delivered over 890 bubbling fluidized bed and CFBs, circulating fluidized bed plants across the globe, where we feel this gives us an excellent amount of expertise in order to build the most robust gasifiers that we can offer to the market. So from the 1980s, you know, SFW has a long history going back, going back to this time, where we started essentially with our roots in supplying syngas from air gasification to lime kilns in the paper industry and power applications. We've delivered 11 gasifiers in total, 7 commercial plants, again for the heat and power sector, 2 very important demonstration projects, which I'll talk about, and 2 pilot plants as well. And you can see the key ones here are with respect to the Sidcraft Biomass IGCC, where we delivered a pressurized gasifier, the Corenso gasifier, where we got experience in using oxygen within the circulating fluidized bed reactor, as well as the M.Sc biofuels demonstration as well. So just to say a little bit about the technology, because we understand that there's quite a lot of exciting technologies that are on the market, but we do believe that direct oxy-steam circulating fluidized bed gasification technology is one of the most robust. And that's what's really matters, really, to try and get that availability and hours of operation to make this more the mainstream. Essentially, we have a relatively simple reactor with its bed 50% of silica sand and 50% of limestone, circulating at around about 5 to 6 meters per second and offering a residence time of 4 to 5 seconds, which gives excellent heat mass and transfer characteristics. Essentially, this is producing a raw syngas, whereabouts up to 80% consists of carbon monoxide and hydrogen, the 2 main building blocks of synthesis applications, and CO2, with the remainder being water gas and long chain hydrocarbons, which of course we can deal with later on down in the process with reforming, which we'll discuss later. But the key thing is this, is that as an oxy gasification technology, we see a nice synthesis with electrolysis, where we also see a lot of action at the moment with respect to e-fuels. But in providing oxygen to the gasifier, we can then use that hydrogen to supplement the synthesis process for even more yields. But perhaps also most importantly to us is that this design of gasifier does not need to have extensive amounts of fuel pre-treatment. You know, we do not need to torrefy, we do not need to pulverize our fuel. We can simply shred it and take the physical inerts out, the metals, the stones, etc., which really significantly helps. So into our first reference from 1993, our Venamo gasifier, the air-blown biomass integrated gasification combined cycle plant, built to realise its high net electrical efficiency, and this was successful in proving providing the hot gas to a gas turbine. Very successful demonstration project with over 8,500 gasification hours, 3,600 using the gas turbine, tested on a variety of different fuels. And I think for us, it was most important for SFW to get this experience in pressurized gasification, because then we can inform our prospective customers with respect to some of the extra challenges associated with gasification at pressure as opposed to atmospheric. But unfortunately, this plant was mothballed in 2002 simply because it wasn't economically viable with the natural gas price. The Larsa gasifier, this was the first gasifier that I laid my hands on, a very exciting project in itself, where essentially, again, oxy-blown low calorific value syngas was fed to a pulverized coal boiler. We had an availability of way over 95%, and we're able to test and gasify a variety of different fuels, as you can see on the right-hand side. Again, one of the most important aspects of fluidized bed gasification is its ability and capability for multi-fuel, what we call, and this graph shows all the different varieties and different mixtures of fuels that we've been gasifying at any one time. And you can see this is also of interest to project owners, where perhaps in the scarcity of feedstock, which is one of the main concerns in the bioenergy industry, we can essentially use different fuels to make the best, more robust business case and for the gate fees, etc., for the projects. Just a snap from the side for the Lahti gasifier. You can see the gasifier here, providing after the cyclone its low calorific value syngas through this duct to a specially designed low CV burner, which is then co-firing this flame. Interestingly, with very little colour in it, you can't see much colour in it at all, with the supplementing the other pulverised coal flames, and in this case was displacing up to about 15% of the overall fuel input. But Lahti doesn't stop there, because in the Lahti Streams EU project that was run by VTT, there was also extensive know-how gained with filtering and reforming at this project as well. So the jewel in the crown, where this all culminated in 2009, so still quite a long time ago, the M.Sc Biofuels project. This was a consortium of Neste and Stora Enso. I'm sure two companies that you've well heard of. We teamed up with VTT and themselves in order to develop this demonstration plant. We provided the gasification and the syngas cleaning, whilst VTT provided the reformer know-how with respect to performing the shifts, etc., on the syngas. The ultra gas cleaning was provided by M.Sc in the form of Rectisol, as well as the smaller 100 kilowatt Fischer-Tropsch synthesis unit. So just to go through this process, we delivered the scope that is delineated in the blue box. Essentially, we dried the wood chop to 15% moisture, and fed this to the gasifier operating at round about 850 degrees. Then cooled the syngas down to about 500 degrees, and put it through a barrier filter, where the alkali metals could condense, and the dust was taken out from the gas before reforming with the water gas shift and the catalytic converter to use a conventional scrubber to take out the chlorine and the sulfur and ammonia to make it suitable for compression before sending it to the synthesis process. Again, looking at the project, the 3D model from afar, we can see the gasifier here. There's the flare on top, feeding system, rotary valve feeders, syngas cooler, hot gas filters, and the reformer before the syngas going off to the ultra clean syngas cooling and the Fischer-Tropsch reactor. And here's a couple of photographs to the right that gives you some idea of the fuels that we used. So to share with you a little bit of the experience, the gasifier ran for a total of about 9,000 hours, and the 5 megawatt slipstream for the syngas cooling and filtering and reforming for about 5,500. The availability for the gasifier was well over 90% in both the 2 years of the demonstration. We had some problems with the slipstream syngas cooling and cleaning in the first year, as you can see, but managed to get that availability to over 90% in 2011 in the second year. And I think the most important point about this is that we gave a provenness to the process of the complete cycle from wood-based biomass to the Fischer-Tropsch crude, which was very successfully demonstrated. So where did this end up back in those days? I guess we culminated in making a design for a commercial plant coming on from the demo at 300 megawatt thermal for the Oxysteam plant. But sadly, this didn't realise at the time due to its capex and I think basically there was a lot of preference at the time for HEFA and first generation biofuels, and second generation had probably quite not got the focus on it at that point. And I think quite simply, you know, we were ahead of our time back in 2010. So we leave the gasification market and we go then to concentrate on providing CFB combustion plants to Asia. But indeed, there's been a lot of action in other parts of the market. And the UK was one of them, and I'll use the UK market as an example of where gasification has essentially not got to where it's needed to be or even wanted to be. This was a situation in which the government were offering a significantly high subsidy for gasification. Nobody really understood what gasification meant, I guess, in that sense, but nevertheless, there was a big subsidy for it, in addition to the wholesale power price. But because there was actually a lobby so that cheaper and lower sophisticated or lower capex technology, they wanted to make sure that they could continue to enjoy this subsidy. So in order to keep everybody engaged and not to upset everybody, at the time it was refused in a 2016 consultation to actually add definitions of syngas cooling and filtering to maximise the maximum value from gasification, because at that time it was widely deemed that no one could actually do it. But even for these more simplified power generation, almost like I think what they've called close coupled combustion plants, there was still some risk adversity, but a bit of an attitude that don't worry, the EPC contractor will actually wrap it and provide you the warranties and guarantees and liquidate damages behind that. But as we'll see shortly, that did actually just result in losses for the industry there. This was corrected in 2018, where I took officials from the UK government to go and see what real gasification actually meant. With the cooling and cleaning and the true value of gasification, which is not to burn the gas, but to use its constituents for further processing, either to biofuels or chemicals, and to try and make that view that it's not just the gasifier itself, it's what you're doing with the gas, and therefore, you know, how you're making a syngas production island. And again, this is a slide kind of saying with respect to why gasification didn't take off before, based on the power generation metric. We can see in these two here, we've got value-added gasification with syngas cooling and cleaning for gas engines and for high efficiency steam cycle, where we're getting net electrical efficiencies of over 30%. But we can see that great combustion and CFB combustion have also improved over the years to practically meet that, and can make the same performance at significantly lower capex and lower technical risk. Intriguingly, a lot of the gasification projects that were actually supported by the government are actually in this area with very low efficiencies, even less than crate combustion. Some of the issues that were encountered, feeding systems that were not well designed, particularly if they were meant for biomass and not RDF, blocked bottom ash extraction systems, builds up of tar and dust in ductwork, etc., agglomerating beds where perhaps it was a BFB. But there was also a huge amount of project delivery and EPC difficulties, where EPC companies were essentially very dependent on small gasification technology companies that seem to have a bit of a habit of falling into bankruptcy at the time. And even with one project, this one here actually made a £70 million loss just with respect to its liquidated damages. But in terms of the whole UK market, a total of £1 billion was lost over these years. However, keeping the positivity, there was a great step forward when the government still, however, acknowledged that gasification could really play its role in achieving net zero and a significant reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. I wouldn't say it forgave all that, but it certainly was open-minded enough to commission a review for some well-leading consultants at FICNA that only reviewed gasification that was using syngas cooling and filtering for biofuel production. And essentially the conclusions on a worldwide basis is that there are several technologies that are meeting the TRL levels of 6 to 8, producing various end products that are suitable for deployment. And of course, these are happening in the world. So the pandemic comes, a chance for us all to breathe, work from home, get to know how to use Teams, etc. But it was useful in terms of providing that space to breathe perhaps, and for government and policy and decision makers to really understand the true value that gasification could bring. And climate change, as we all know, the awareness has risen massively in the last few years. This graph from the BBC shows that even since the gasification story at SFW from 1980s, you can almost see how climate change is very much increasing. These are these days of the year for each year with the average daily temperatures, and you can see how that is growing. And so the question has got to be, well, if gasification, value-added gasification isn't going to happen now when we most need it, when is it going to? Especially when we look at these graphs, when we see that 2023, only just last year, showed some incredible phenomena with respect to increased temperatures, air and sea temperatures, shown in these in this red band that is above the previous daily records for the year. And of course, we perhaps got far more perception and understanding of some of the freak weather events that is happening, and of course the heat waves and wildfires that happened across Canada and the US last year, which is of course, you know, taking away potential sources of feedstock in itself. And of course, I think at the moment, even Chile, there's always somewhere in the world that seems to be suffering from greater magnitude and frequencies of environmental disaster. But thank goodness the world is responding and has decided that biofuels are to play its part. And of course, gasification can also provide a key part of that delivery. So in the next few slides, I'll focus on the aviation and the maritime sectors with respect to how things are moving things forward there. So we've got increasing regulatory support for sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. Countries are stepping up, saying that 10% of the SAF mandate, 10% of blending must be done by SAF by 2030, including Canada, the UK and Japan. You can clearly see that we're starting to leave that power generation behind. We see in the US a very exciting market with the Inflation Reduction Act, supporting SAF production with tax credits, as well as a nice big funding pot of 4.3 billion in order to move SAF projects forward. And of course, we're delighted to be working with our colleagues in Japan and the Japanese government in pushing the technology there, as well as in Europe and the North Americas. So in this graph and a map, you can see how the US and Canada in the light blue, it's almost like leading the charge, with Asia Pacific expected to follow behind. It wouldn't be fair to say that Europe is lagging, but perhaps will not make the greatest amounts of production on the worldwide stage. That's going to be left to the North Americas and the Asia Pacific. Methanol and the shipping industry is a really exciting market which we're fully involved with at the moment. There's only 0.2 million tons of renewable biomethanol on the world markets today for shipping. So we need to make a huge increase in the amount of methanol that's enabled from 100 million tons to 500 million tons by 2050. And this area, the 135 in the yellow, is essentially for production of the fuel from non-e-fuel, kind of background. But you can see that why the shipping industry has preferred methanol over ammonia when you look at how cheaper methanol is to convert to than ammonia in itself, with 9% less O&M costs. And 5% less bunkering costs, being able to use that existing infrastructure. So M.Sc is incredibly active across the globe, seemingly to sign up MOUs with project developers to take off their methanol from their biorefineries when they build them. Methanol is seen as perceived as lower technical and economic risk. It's got more diverse end uses, so it's less vulnerable with respect to its bankability for that. The oil and gas companies particularly like it because you can use existing fossil fuel infrastructure that's available for transport and storage, and of course it can be upgraded to SAF or gasoline. Yeah, and we're seeing now an increasing number of ships being ordered. 35 ships, ordered just in 2022, but we expect for the number of ships to be increasing up to 2028 and beyond. So policy and now regulation, and looking just for an example from the EU for a moment, we've got the refuel EU initiatives for aviation and shipping, where essentially emissions are being cut to 55% of the average from 2020 by 2030. We can see how aircraft fuel suppliers are obliged to increase their blend, really significantly from the low value of, say, around about 2% today, all the way to 70% in the way up to 2050. So a huge carrot and stick being applied here to make this happen in the aviation world, with no more tankering being prohibited and airports being obliged to provide the infrastructure. That's already happening, for example, in airports such as Schiphol, Amsterdam, London Heathrow, Dusseldorf, all pioneers and trailblazers. We're seeing the same thing in the maritime industry, where the focus is on large vessels, over 5,000 gross tons that account for over 90% of the CO2 emissions from the sector. Yeah, of course, there's areas which they want them to get into, including shore power to decrease their emissions, but certainly including what fuels they use for propulsion is a huge part of them being able to achieve this 80% reduction in emissions from 2050. So the point is that these regulations are now providing a level playing field, which was absent back in 2016 in the I think worldwide, but certainly in the context of the UK market, which we discussed before, which of course led to a huge amount of chaos and confusion and that billion loss of pounds in that sense. So this is great news for the industry. It's going to encourage production and the uptake of fuels and drive competitiveness, as well as encouraging the innovation and the investment to do that. And here at SFW is clearly, this is where we are placing our efforts. So let's celebrate some of these achievements that have been happening from 2020. We saw in June 2021, the JAL flight, Japan Airlines, flew their flight from Tokyo to Sapporo, using a SAF blend, 50% at that time, using SAF from the photosynthesis technology at the Nagoya Gasification plant, using woody biomass. Enichem has been leading the way and has never really detracted from the focus of biofuels, and it's essentially progressed very well from their Westbury demonstration plant to the Edmonton plant. We saw only just last week that at 15,000 hours of operation that they're going to retire that plant now, but they got the certification for converting waste to biomethanol and indeed to bioethanol as well. And I think what I'm particularly excited about is Enichem's project to be coupled with a 90 megawatt proton exchange membrane electrolyzer for reasons we'll discuss later, near you guys, just in Varennes. I'm very sad not to be with you closer to home there. And then in Tarragona, where this exciting Spanish project, it's got the EU support grants won, and Enikema are moving that forward with Repsol. Fulcrum, Sierra Biofuels, it almost comes up at every meeting at the moment, and we really do wish them continued success. They became operational back in December with the first synthesis of Fischer-Tropsch crude wax from Johnson Matthey technology. All the sector, the financiers, we're all looking to this to be the first and essentially be a real pathfinder in opening up the industry. We understood that just a couple of weeks ago they actually shipped their first fuel in quantity from the Sierra Biofuels plant, so that's a huge success to celebrate there. And of course they're coming near to me in London, hopefully with their next plant at North Point, which has just received a £17 million grant from the UK government, due to enter operations in 2027. Phylosis, another well-known synthesis company for quite some time now. They're in feed, fully supported by their EPC partner Bechtel, and with the offtake from Southwest Airline, they're preparing their site. In Immingham, the UK, in the industrial heartlands of our northeast, they're also preparing a biorefinery based on refuse-derived fuel, supported by British Airways, and this is also to be integrated in our East Coast cluster of carbon capture, where you can sequester the CO2 under the sea, and they have also received a £27 million grant into the project. And then just in November of 2023, it really doesn't seem that Christmas was that long ago, and this was just before that. But Virgin Atlantic was successful in flying the world's first 100% SAF commercial flight from London Heathrow to New York. Wow, it is actually believable. We can fly in a sustainable way and not feel guilty about it. This was around about 88% this time on SAF from heifer and 12% from synthetic kerosene. But nevertheless, it was seen that shown that in order to make this happen, we need to use all the different technologies that can make it happen on all the different feedstocks. So what are we doing with respect to collaboration and innovation to drive things forward, making sure that now really is the time? At SHI-FW, we're working with Phylosis, Air Liquide, Wood and Johnson Matthey, for example, with respect to understanding their synthesis technologies at the back end and how we can work to optimize our own syngas production island, and then working very closely with VTT and Schmitzerschach with respect to, again, optimizing our syngas production island for gas reforming. So as part of the solution development to produce our production islands, we've used an informed approach using Aspen Plus modeling, HSC, getting the process design data. We use the US Department of Energy's approach for trying to second guess how EPC contractors and companies might price these projects. And then we've essentially used our process design and data from there with respect to performance in technical economic analysis to see about to calculate levelized cost of production figures and back calculate the required SAF price that we would need in order to take it to market. We looked at two different capacities on 150 and 300 megawatt thermal. This is 1 and 2 lines of SHI-FW syngas production island using different reformers, the catalytic and the POX, whether we use the water gas shift or added hydrogen to reach the stoichiometric ratio required for Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, the 2 hydrogen to CO ratio for the end product of SAF. And here's the PFDs to show it. The catalytic process is very much as what we successfully demonstrated at the M.Sc Biofuels demonstration project. And here we have the thermal partial oxidation reforming route here, where essentially the reform itself operates at over 1,300 degrees with an auxiliary fuel and an oxygen. The oxygen required for that is around about 25% of what would be required for the whole biorefinery. But the auxiliary fuel would most preferably come from tail gas, from the synthesis unit, or indeed natural gas. So again, looking a bit more at the reformers that we've been looking at, the catalytic reformer uses zirconium and nickel-based catalysts and uses the injection of steam and oxygen in order to produce its resultant syngas, whilst the POX reactor is much more sensitive to particle load distribution, and we must make sure that there is a adequate mixing of the syngas with the hot oxygen burner flame. But we can see from the catalytic reformer we get more water gas shift, which is resulting in around about 16% more hydrogen in the syngas, as you can see, compared to the POX. But the POX is very good at reforming methane, which in turn is increasing the carbon monoxide amount in the gas. But we can see where, in the absence of any supplementary hydrogen, the one reformer has the catalytic has advantages over the POX, but the POX might have advantage over the catalytic where there was other forms of hydrogen available. But of course, this is not the full story, as we'll see later. So back calculating this, we can see the prices for SAF up on the yellow lines, and the column showing the levelized cost of production. We can see immediately that we have quite an OPEX when we're adding hydrogen with respect to the hydrogen. But you can see that when adding supplementary hydrogen, the cost of the price of the SAF significantly decreases by a few €100 per tonne. And you can see that the time is perhaps coming right when we can see that these biorefineries at this kind of capacity are providing numbers that are matching the current prices for SAF at the moment. FlexSNG, as Paul said, this is the big focus for today, so I won't say any more about this after taking Ilkka Hiltunen's slide. But of course, we're very happy to be one of the industrial partners in terms of realising this. And in fact, even just yesterday, I had a very exciting call with a customer who's very interested to see how gasification plants can be designed with flexibility to realise different proportions of biomethane to biochar with its end products, knowing that biochar is becoming an increasingly important revenue stream. But an area with VTT that we're working, which I'm very excited about, is almost like project design with respect to CO2 recycling and electrolysis for added hydrogen. Very frequently, our customers come to us just assuming that there's going to be a limitless supply of green hydrogen, whereas in reality, that's incredibly very small and it's very, very expensive. So we're delighted to work on these, looking at these scenarios with VTT. The first, sizing an electrolyzer to replace the water gas shift. And as you can see, expected capacities of 25 to 50 megawatts is much more realisable for 150 megawatts thermal gasification syngas island, increasing the yields by about 30%. And then the second scenario, looking at the electrolyzer dimension to produce all the required oxygen of the biorefinery, of the reformer, of the gasifier, etc. This can significantly increase the carbon conversion and the end product yield again, perhaps up to 60% plus. And 100 megawatt electrolyzer is going to be required for that. Still pretty significant, but this is perhaps exactly the philosophy in which Enerchem has decided to go forward with their 90 megawatt sized electrolyzer for ends. So now you can understand why I'm very excited about that. But the key point is that this has been validated by VTT in the EU project. And of course, it makes sense to be able to use the CO2, which we can strip from the syngas before used for synthesis. And then the third option, which is typically what we discuss with customers but worry a little bit about, is this bit about limitless supplies of green hydrogen that provide those maximum product yields, which look great in the financial model, but we do wonder whether it is actually realisable. And it's almost on the point of these plants becoming e-fuel plants at this point, where roughly half of the amount of energy input is actually coming from electricity. So here we can see here the molar ratio of the hydrogen to the carbon monoxide in the syngas. That's actually controlled by the electrolysis unit itself, but that's not actually going to be able to produce enough oxygen for the syngas production and reforming part of the plant. So an ASU would be required in addition to that. But then an electrolyzer that is sized to provide all the oxygen requirements then enables the CO2 to be stripped from the gas, as you see here, from the ultra-class cleaning back to the fluidized bed gasifier and the catalytic reformer. And of course, we can get some reverse water gas shift in these reactors to increase the carbon monoxide value, which in turn can then make additional capacity for hydrogen to be added, and driving your yields up much more. So I don't mind admitting this is certainly personally my favourite to get stuck into. So in terms of how we're responding to all this, this is a typical gasification to biofuel pathway. We will focus at SFW on SAF, biomethanol and RNG. We are a provider of syngas islands and to be the integrator of the components within that island, working very closely with third-party technologies, for the reforming in order to get the best syngas compositions that we can. Pre-treatment is something which we'd lead to others. There are some very good companies out there that do the necessary pre-processing preparation for fluidized bed technology. BMH, for company, is a company, for example, that has provided their technology in front of many fluidized beds in Finland with our combustion plants, and they are also providing to Enerchem for the Varennes plant. Synthesis, of course, we work with our partners with on there, as discussed earlier. We're certainly very serious about integrating electrolyzers with our offering, as well as this CO2 recycling as well. But essentially, it will still be down to EPC contractors to provide the full scope of the plant to owners and financiers, etc., with the warranties and guarantees behind that. So, in the final part of my presentation to you today, where are we now and heading to? So, I just couldn't help but just put this pipeline up, just to say just how busy we are and how positive we feel about the sector as it is at the moment. We are selected for FEED studies, which are due to commence this year. We have exclusivity for an exciting project in Japan. I think it's fair to say that the larger projects are mostly in the States and Canada, and the smaller ones are in Europe and Japan, and I think that's most likely the function of the available feedstock. So our present focus is bankability. People are asking us very serious questions with respect to the track record which is needed to give others the comfort in order to finance these and really make these projects happen. And so with respect to that, we focus on our expertise to enable us to guarantee syngas composition, availability and reliability of plant and technology, in the scope which I explained, before. For items outside of our scope, we collaborate with our technology partners to manage the technology risk. There's the question of what first of a kind guarantees actually really means, as well as EPCM or an EPC route. What is the best way of making these happen? Of course, it does depend on who the end project owner would be and their own degree of in-house expertise with respect to that. We do realise that we need to work at at scale to get the economics that are required for sensible business cases to enable the sector to move beyond using venture capital to more conventional project finance sources of capital to fund the projects. So concluding, why is the time now? Well, as I said, I really do believe that we've got a level of awareness of climate change that we've never seen before. Also, the need for energy security. I think the amount of conflict that is going on in the world at the moment has never been at such a level since World War II, which is clearly playing its part with governments then providing the policies and moving to that place of being able to provide what we need, this level playing field with respect to value-added gasification for the synthesis fuels production for those difficult to decarbonise industries, such as the maritime and aviation sectors, which so desperately need that. I think what's most exciting for me is that leading technology companies are really engaged and collaborating, working very well together with a great sense of purpose, alongside very credible EPC and engineering companies and financiers. Who would have thought that I would have been, sipping wine with financiers from the likes of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan just a few weeks ago with respect to gasification and biofuels. That was really the first in my career that certainly made me a bit excited. We've got great encouragement from off-takers such as the airlines and M.Sc, with leaders such as JL and British Airways and so many others that are leading the pack and M.Sc with respect to that. And of course, we're seeing the oil and gas companies, the fossil fuel companies that are also really engaging with us, and it's great to see them with their ideas of how to use existing infrastructure to play their part in the understanding of making this happen. Everyone is focusing to make this happen now. And finally, I was just wondering, do you just feel that now is the time? So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention with respect to listening to my keynote speech to you today. Here are my contact details. Please feel free to contact me if you've got any further questions. Back over to you, Paul.
Thank you, David. That was really an amazing perspective. Looking back, we didn't get the price on biofuels that we wanted, and maybe went bankrupt. Now the regulations are much firmer. Some uncertainty. The innovation, if the cost is in the gasifier and the risk is in the syngas cleanup, so much innovation there, and then the creeping up of that all-important yield, reforming, and those issues related to symbiosis of hydrogen and oxygen and CO2 recycle, and how we integrate into our background. So it's an amazing perspective, actually. And I'm wondering what kind of wine you drank with Goldman Sachs. So I'll look at the chat. You can do so similarly, I think, David, for questions later. And then I have a question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for their questions before you answer my question. And my question is, given the risk and given where we are in the development of gasification biofuel, processes. What would be the two big questions as somebody on that side of the desk? What would be the two big questions if you were comparing the, credible providers of this technology? What would be the questions you would ask them in order to be able to best mitigate risk if you were comparing suppliers of gasification syngas cleanup technology? But before you answer that, let's go to the audience if you've got any questions. Okay. Thoughts on the presentation? None. Okay. And then we'll go to. I'm looking now at the comments. Number of people at distance. However, no comments or questions at the moment. Feel free to add them. We'll go back to you for your for that soul-searching question for you, David, of what would be the two questions. Oh, we've got a question. Thank you.
Yes, I've got one. So Etienne Bernier from Natural Resources Canada. I live in Varennes. My question is, okay, you showed that ammonia is more expensive than methanol as marine fuel. But if you were to produce bioammonia, you would have CO2 as a product, and that might end up having more value stored than reused. So are you still exploring that avenue where you would use gasification to produce mostly hydrogen and CO2, and then perhaps ammonia as a fuel?
I must admit, we're not focused on ammonia at the moment, but we certainly appreciate, especially in some of the markets which are providing a large subsidy for biogenic CO2 as a kind of side product with respect to the biorefinery. So I really do appreciate your comment with respect to that. So we are definitely looking at bringing the CO2 capture and the utilization of CO2, biogenic CO2, kind of within our understanding for project offering, but not really focusing on the ammonia. But we do see, of course, that we are able to strip the CO2 from from methanol and from SAF production as well. So it's always seen as a part of the project, really.
Okay, David, answer to that question. The two questions you would ask to yourself if you were on the other side of the desk that would be critical for understanding the risk associated with going forward after you've talked about, and you did mention Keor and Range and the spectacular failures we've also had in North America, of course. What would be the two questions you would ask?
Well, I mean, I think, the simple question, Paul, is does it work? But that's such a simple question, and in the case of gasification, encompasses a huge amount of potential issues. But does it work for the purpose, with which it's intended? What's the availability? What's the downtime? What are the problems and the issues with the reliability that has been kind of encountered? Are the feeding systems fit for purpose? And this kind of thing, and really looking at track record with respect to operational hours and data. This is essentially the main way that I would look at this, and of course this is the way that all banks engineers and due diligence consultants are going to look at it as well.
Yeah, great. Can you get that data in an unbiased manner? Can you go and ask for primary data from a technology provider?
Well, I think if the technology provider wants to sell their technology, that is definitely something that is going to have to be supplied, to be rigorously looked over and assessed. I think that comes as part of the territory pool.
Great. So thank you very much. We'll be watching the next 5 years or so as these projects come online, and we'll see where it goes. That was a really great overview. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for having me, and thanks all.
Now, if we could advance the slide one, that'd be great. Peux-tu avancer le parvenir sa tête? So now we have three speakers next up, and we're going to dive down into the FlexSNG process itself. And the first speaker, I'm going to say it, kind of the godfather of the process in many ways. I know he's blushing because he would never admit that to Ilkka Hiltunen. He's been working for 15 years in research and development at VTT of thermochemical biomass technologies and their applications. His experience in industrial cooperation projects such as FlexSNG, such as with Sumitomo and Wood, and new technology demonstration and piloting activities. The main focus of his work has been on the development, piloting, and demonstration of biomass to transport fuel technologies based on gasification. He has a strong knowledge on fluidized bed gasification technology, biomass gasification, hot gas filtration, and reforming technologies. And it's a pleasure to have him tell it the way it is today.
All right, so good morning, all of you. Great to be here. I'm Ilkka Hiltunen. I'm working as a research team leader at VTT, and my team is focusing on biomass and waste gasification and also synthesis gas processing, so CO2 utilization. What VTT is, it was already mentioned in David's presentation several times, but we are a research organization from Finland. So we are a state-owned limited company. We are multi-technological. We are about 2,200 employees at VTT, but then quite widely divided for different topics. Of course, in Finland, we have a strong background and still strong in forestry. So all type of new forestry products, new energy based on biomass. That's in really strong focus. Well, we have also quite a long background in biomass gasification. As actually there in David's presentation, there was already quite nicely explained different kind of developments from, let's say, from gas engine, IGCC developments. We were involved in those, waste gasification. But then when looking at the synthesis gas and production biofuels and biochemicals, we have been there already since early 1990s, when actually there was a B2 ammonia plant based on German technology that time, based on high temperature Winkler, which was then followed by tar removal by scrubbing technologies. Then there was, well, the driver was the oil crisis for that, but then oil price was dropped quite heavily, so the financial dropped also from that plant, and there was quite quiet times then, maybe something like 15 years. And then early 2000, there was starting let's say a bit like a boom for producing Fischer-Tropsch diesel out from woody residues. And we then had some national programs, EU programs, and then it led into this energy biofuels demonstration. But as David mentioned, it didn't lead into the industrial success. It was technically feasible. It worked really nicely. I spent there about 5 years at that plant. But the policy and the environment for such kind of technology was not really there. And after that, we have been then still focusing on getting the capex lower, getting the wider feedstock bases, and I think now in recent, let's say 3 years, there has been a really high interest for once again for these technologies, and I really hope that we will see then a successful future. It has been the tradition for gasification so far that there is a really large project, at least at this continent, which have then failed really largely. And I think now we don't have like space for such developments. We should really focus on getting these things forward on solid background, solid basis. So what we have mainly focused is this type of process where we have this robust CFB or BFB, fluidized bed gasifier, steam and oxygen blown. It's quite a simple from structure and really robust for what comes to feedstock basis. After the gasification, there is a lot of solids still, even though the carbon conversion in the process is really high, 98% over even. But of course there is then ashes and bed materials. So the filtration is then the second step. We get all the particulates out from the gas, which then ease out the processing of the gas afterwards. Then we get like heavy metals, alkali metals, most part of chlorine already taken out from at the filtration step. Then the reforming technology is really like the key of these innovations. So there we then the tars or the heavier hydrocarbons which are present in the gas are then decomposed, and then the yield for the synthesis gas is maximized. And what was already showed in the David presentation, that in a way the hydrogen to CO ratio is quite favorable already after the reformer, and we can already adjust the ratio in that step, which gives a benefit over some other technologies. But still, the gas is not clean enough for utilizing at the Fischer-Tropsch or methanol synthesis. Those are maybe the two main technologies where industry is now focusing. We are also focusing, well, sulfur components must be taken out, nitrogen components, if there is some chlorine, hydrocarbons, so the ultra cleaning. But that's something which can be handled with, for example, with really conventional rectisol technology, if the scale is high enough. The capex of the rectisol is really high, so it needs to be in large scale, as is it in oil industry, for example. And this all has been demonstrated. So basically, this is now in technology readiness level of 7. So then the next steps, which there are the first of its kind plant, and that's of course a huge step, and David has a really good view on that. But it's not like fully like the technological. We can convince that the technology works itself, but it's also the financial and how to handle the risk. And the capital investments are really high, as there is many steps in these processes. About the reformer technology. So basically, it's quite a well, simple in that sense that we have a catalyst beds where we then insert some oxygen to raise the temperature, bring the energy for the reactions. We have active catalysts there. Basically, mainly the choices are zirconium or noble metal or nickel-based catalyst. Nickel-based catalysts are maybe now what is quite favored because of their reasonable price tag, and then also they are commercially available and from many suppliers. This technology we have been developed at our own pilots for several thousands of hours, and then it has been demonstrated at that M.Sc Biofuels demonstration. And how we then cooperate with this? So we are a non-profit research institute. So we are licensing the technology. We are not delivering anything. So we are cooperating then with the technology companies, for example, as Sumitomo Foster Wheeler, but that's that's the way how we are in that game. We are not to deliver anything. This is our pilot, which we have in close to Helsinki, Finland. So basically, we have the whole train where we can then test different type of feedstocks, variety of biomasses, mainly woody biomasses, of course, in what is like in Scandinavia, really interested ones, agrobiomasses, and then also wastes. I think we are quite, in a way, when thinking about like the situation which you have in Canada and the status, we have really much focused on the forest residues, different kind of biomasses. That's also by legislation, because in Europe, waste-based, if you have a waste as a feedstock, like municipal solid waste, it's not calculated as biofuel. So we have focused much on biomasses, as then, for example, Enerchem has focused really a lot of municipal solid wastes. We have the whole chain. We have also the synthesis there, Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, where we can then produce batches of Fischer-Tropsch products for further studies, doing as also like a showcases, because sometimes you have to convince some not that technical persons. For engineers, this is something that everything we can do, but for someone, it might be that it's more on seeing that there is really that product which they are looking for. The M.Sc Biofuels was so nicely presented already by David, but we were involved in that as a research partner, and that's our role also. We develop the technologies to that TRL5 level, so we can pilot them at our environment. But then we support the industry. So our role is to support the industry to then successfully bring these technologies into real commercial scale. And it's worth also to remember that this has been already some years back, this demonstration, but it showed that, okay, steam and oxygen blown gasification for biomasses, it has been proven. It's 9,000 hours of operation, smooth operation. It can be discussed in more detail with Sumitomo. Also the slipstream with filtering, with reforming, that's also something which is it's proven. And it's quite costly to make these kind of demonstrations, so it's not wise to start to do same thing now 10 years later. but to build on this. And that's what we are doing in FlexSNG. So basically, we have that background where there is the industry in our flexible production of synthetic natural gas and biochar via gasification of biomass and waste feedstocks. That's the topic of this name of this project. And in this project, we cooperate with the EU partners and then the Canadian partners. So this is a really nice example of cooperation of universities, research institutes, and then the technology companies, where we have then from technology companies, Bautzen, Wood, Johnson Matthey, and Sumitomo as a and creative optimization for the value chain. So what we are then developing. So basically we focus on getting the CapEx lower from the process. We optimize the feedstock supply chain, and then we decrease the production cost of biomethane by these means. And basically how it is done. So this is like a typical setup of gasification to methane production. And then one innovation we are bringing in is how to produce the oxygen, not through the air separation units, but have a oxygen membrane technology. Which is then estimated that it will bring like a -10% of the capex. It's pretty capex intensive, the oxygen production. Then we can eliminate the water gas shift. There are two things. The reformer is something where we can adjust it already, and then the waste methanation technology we have. It's really more flexible than the competitors. We replaced basically the rectisol technology with dry sulfur removal based on zinc or activated carbon processes, and then the waste methanation, which Wood has in their portfolio, is simpler and really efficient process, which also makes it possible to remove CO2 after the synthesis. So then we gain quite much benefits from that, and that brings it to about 30% of capex decrease, where we focus. We have then make tests for that. Other thing which we have is these two operational modes. So in this project, we are focusing not to only maximize the yield of SNG, but also produce biochar, and that's like really the research focus in this project. So how to utilize fluidized gasification in such way that we can also produce in certain circumstances, if it seems feasible, biochar. It can be then carbon sink. It can be used in construction. So it could bring some benefits in the future, and it is basically done so that the process itself is the same. The gasifier itself is the same, but we just run it bit differently, so that we get then a lower carbon efficiency, or in a way carbon conversion in the gasifier, and then we recover the biochar which is produced. or then what is like the typical case, let's say nowadays, to maximize the production of the synthetic natural gas or RNG, where we then target to get a 70% conversion on energy basis. And I think we are now quite near to that target, but it will be then really calculated and estimated more carefully. And what we actually then do, we make a pilot scale test in this project, generate data, and then later on make the techno-economic evaluations, and then many case studies for actually where we can then show that, okay, how feasible this kind of technology would be and what would be the optimal locations. And well, we have quite extensive infrastructure at VTT, so basically we are utilizing these for this project, but also for many other projects. So that's what we can then help industry and being really effectively, because we have already the infra. We can be an outsourced research partner who does the tests, and you get the results really fast. You don't need to invest into your own infrastructures. Thank you.
Fellows, I think they sort of have a religion of not going beyond TRL 5 or 6 or somewhere around that, and then working closely and seeing the commercial implications and one technology at a time. It's really impressive. Two of the VTT facilities just outside Helsinki. Checking for questions online.
Yeah, I think we might have actually a question here. Please.
I don't want to be the only one asking questions. A very simple one. Does your process allow to separate the ash from the char, or does it come together?
Well, basically, part of the ash comes together with the biomass from the gasifier. So in the biomass of the gasifier, we collect really minor part of the char. So basically, there we get part, but of course then quite much of the char of the ash is actually binded into this biochar, and that then restricts where it can be used. And IFER actually has made a great job then to research that topic. Good question, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, Sébastien Héron. I like your idea of having like a plant that can switch to product that you can target based on your needs. But my understanding is that gasification is best done at larger scale, and if you're planning your plant for various applications, then you're paying for equipment that you're not necessarily benefiting from all the time, right? I'm wondering, do you think that gasification and the syngas can be viable at like a small scale where you would have another target than syngas, but you could produce some products as needed, let's say?
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit also myself like thinking of that. So it's honestly speaking, yeah. It's a bit challenging to have these two modes of operation. I think if we are looking first of its kind plants, it definitely will go to maximized synthetic natural gas. And the scale, we need quite large scale. Let's say based on our earlier calculations, maybe 100 megawatt of feedstock input, it's like the minimum where it could be like a start to be feasible. So really small scale applications, I doubt it need to be then really high value product which you get out, or then really high gate fee for your feedstock. So those are maybe the possibilities. Thank you.
Next speaker is Eric Ronquist, who's going to talk to us about flexible and integrated biomass value chains. He's the first of two speakers with the same last name, who's tall, has a Swedish accent, and good looking, and they're sitting together. So I don't know if they may be related or not. Eric Ronquist has a Master of Science in Industrial Engineering and extensive experience in the areas of forest logistics, bioenergy, and mining. His specialty is supply chain strategies and decision support, and he works at Creative Optimization, Chief Operating Officer, a small but very talented team who developed software that we're using throughout FlexSNG for each of the case studies to manage new decisions for innovation projects and operational research projects. And you saw that pesky little minus 20% in biomass supply cost for FlexSNG, and creative optimization in collaboration with the Université Laval is where that's all happening. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you. So yes, my name is Eric Ronquist. A little short brief on what we do at Creative Optimization. We specialize in optimization of the value chain. So we're a small company with a large background working with the majority of the forestry companies in Sweden and parts of Scandinavia, where we actually do operational and tactical planning for forest supply chains and looking at bioenergy as well through forest residues. So we have an extensive knowledge in working with forest residues and so the value chain overall, and seeing how we can gather and utilize it at a maximized income and efficiency. So today I will focus on talking about what we've done in the FlexSNG project, where we start off with the value chain challenge. What do we have for challenges having more supply chains and more feedstocks now rather than just forestry and forest residues? And also coming up with what's the solution approach that we actually developed, which is quite innovative, and why we can reduce this 20%. I'll also show some of the ideas and the scenario analysis that we use in sort of the case studies overall, seeing what is the potential and how can we evaluate where it is profitable and we actually have the feedstock availability. So to start off with a challenge, we now have three sort of feedstock types. We have forest residue, including logging residue, bark, and sawdust from sawmills or other residues from forestry production. We also have agricultural waste, where we have sort of straw, solid manure, olive tree prunings, sunflower stalks, and corn stover. It's quite dependent on where you are in Europe or in Canada. Having these olive tree prunings doesn't happen much in Scandinavia. So there's a big branch of different opportunities having feedstocks in the value chain. Then we also have the municipality solid waste, where we sort of waste wood and solid waste manure as well. So we have a lot of different feedstock here being fed into this system and providing the sort of the feedstock for the FlexSNG or other processes in production. So looking at the challenges in the supply chain, we sort of have these three streams now. And what we really want to do is that we want to produce, either biomethane or biochar or heat. So we have three value chains, and we have three products that we can co-produce. And looking at the sort of the challenges, it's quite different in the value chain overall, where we can see that we have for the agriculture, we have the seasonal variability. We have a very limited window where we actually can harvest agri-waste. We have variation in properties because we had quite a lot of different types of agri-waste in the system. We also include different kind of mode of transportation, the price efficiency, and of course, a very important thing, the moisture level. And sort of for the forest residue part, we have when do we process? Because now we have the challenge of we have forest residues, but we need to break that into ships. So where do we do it? Do we do it at the harvesting site? Do we do it at a terminal? Or do we actually do it at the end products facility? We also had to take into account transporting either ships or the forest residue. We'd have to have different transportation modes. Of course, we have different quality in this because we have a different kind of trees. And then it's also the aspect of resource allocation, because now we have equipment that needs to go around, and we have to have different kind of capacity limitations for actually doing the chipping, actually getting us the right feedstock for the process. Of course, it's the same as agriculture. We have a price efficient range where are we cost effective with the feedstock. And then, of course, inventory utilization, because we now are very intensive during perhaps winter and summer, where we can harvest a lot, and we have a more difficult part when we have coming from one season to the other with limitations for the equipment going into the forestry sites producing this kind of logging residue. Of course, then we have the municipality solid waste. It's the same question here. When do we process? Do we process it at the sort of the bioeconomy or centers, biomass centers, or do we do it at larger terminals? Do we do it at the end product? Where do we actually gather that? And what is the availability? For us in Scandinavia, municipality solid waste is highly competitive by a lot of bioenergy production, utilizing this product and centralizing their entire infrastructure around gathering that at eco centers and then taking that kind of share, not sharing with others with that kind of product. Of course, we have cost efficiency and inventory limitations as well, having to store it over time. Then what we also have in this kind of value chain, the challenge of doing the supply chain, is that we actually have to take care of what do we want to produce, handling different kind of campaigns, seeing what kind of recipe we want to do. So now when we can co-handle different kind of feedstock, we can also use different kind of properties. We can combine forest residue with agricultural waste, which means that we need to define what kind of recipes do we want to use at what time. Also, the question of capacity, how much can we have, how much inventory, how much can we gather, and utilizing this resource over time, as well as drying process. What kind of soil moisture level content do we want? Do we want to have a process that we can dry it? Do we want to keep it more dry in the beginning, having more inventory over time? And of course, the yield of the feedstock. As I mentioned, we have the seasonal variation, and then of course, quite often it's the price and cost and competitiveness, because we have to make sure that we are still competitive within gathering this supply chain and this kind of feedstock, being able to provide that 20% efficiency. So looking at what we've done in the FlexSNG project, which is quite unique, is that we actually developed sort of a process that we can follow quality and soil moisture levels over time. And I'll go into that a bit in depth, but what we mean is that we can now look at different kind of soil moisture for the feedstock over time. So when do we want to go and pick it up, and what kind of process do we want to associate with dropping that kind of soil moisture level, and also taking into account the inventory, where do we want to store it? Another part is that we're looking at the transportation modes, where we see the processes and the feedstock handling. As I mentioned before, sort of where do we want to ship and what kind of transportation mode do we want to use? Do we want to use a truck or do we want to use a train? And we can combine this within the optimization model as well. Another part is looking at, well, now when we have all the feedstock, as I mentioned, sort of looking at the campaigns, how do we want to produce, taking into account the feedstock price, the feedstock soil moisture, and also the inventory cost of having these kind of different materials. As I mentioned before, we have agriculture waste where we have a small window, but we have forest residue, which is a large window. So do we want to store forest residues when we gather agriculture, or do we want to store agriculture to when forest residue becomes a more expensive product during fall or winter? And of course, co-handling capacity in this joint value chain has also been a key in the FlexSNG project. So just a very short description on how are we looking at the solution approach for the transports. It's really what I mentioned before. We're looking at when do we want to make what decision. So we have forest residue. When do we want to ship it? Because we know that we will have one transportation mode for forest residue. We know we will have one for wood chips. and also combining. If we want to use train, we need to convert it into wood chips. So we need to take that into account when we look at the terminal or intermediate levels of having the supply chain and having different kind of levels. And of course, we have to take into account the seasonal availability of road access, as I mentioned, during fall and spring, when you have the sort of the seasons where it's more wet, it's harder to gain access to that kind of product. As an example for forest residue. So what we've done in the project as well is that to have this challenge and include all of this kind of trucking and train, we included a way of creating the road network, which we can actually utilize dynamically for all of the case studies where we can find either in Sweden or in Canada, or we can be on Crete in Greece, or we can even be in New Zealand for the pending. So we can create this road network to really utilize the real transportation costs and the real distances for going with the truck. And as I mentioned quickly, is the moisture and the quality over time is that you have sort of moisture over time. If you would have a pile lying by the road, it would have a different soil moisture count by the season, as well as you would have another moisture count when you've done the harvesting, as well as drying to make it less soil moisture for the upcoming period and production. So what we've done is that we've made a methodology. This is for a monthly period, but we can also have this on a daily or a weekly level, is that we can see this is the soil moisture count if we would leave it by the roadside storage. So now we have availability to, okay, so this is the soil moisture if it's lying there, and it's been lying there for quite a while. Well, we have to remember, so what we associate with that is a function to sort of find, we have agriculture as well, to find where do we hit that curve. So we have soil moisture, how many time period does it take to hit that curve and then stay with it? So we can take this into account by the time period to associate with the quality and also the cost and the production to actually gather when to ship and when to transport. And of course, what we included as well is the way of doing a drying process where we can actually do drying processes either at a terminal or at the production facility. Yeah, and so looking at sort of the process mode and campaigns, that is sort of how do we handle different feedstocks now with the recipes, looking at the production. So it's also about looking at the pre-process handling, like a quality increase that I mentioned before, the drying, the grinding, etc. And also to be able to produce this flexible output that Ilkka very nicely explained, sort of the mode 1 and mode 2. What do we want to produce and what kind of recipe do we want to utilize? So looking at that, we can now in the model actually take this into account. We can take the pre-treatment and we can have the production, but we can now have different kind of recipes. So these are example, of course, there's many more and percentage within this, but we can have forest, we can have forest agri, we can have forest agri and wood waste. That's depending on the production and sort of what you want to use as a recipe for the quality of ash content, etc. And what we can really do then is that we can, with the model, we can create these campaigns. When should you use what material associating to what you want to produce? And also looking at what would be the transportation cost for your product, what would be the inventory cost of keeping the product. And so we can make examples and do scenarios depending on what is the most valued attribute and also what brings the most value. And of course, now when we have that kind of full complete model of the value chain, we can now look at the sort of the scenario analysis of the part of it. So what kind of location do we want? What is the feedstock availability in the nearby neighborhood? What kind of transportation mode do we have access to? And also what kind of processing and pre-treatment facilities are available? Of course, it's the competitiveness becomes a big important part of this. So this is just an example where we're looking at forest residue and some agricultural waste. As I mentioned before, we have municipality solid waste is quite highly competitive, so we don't have that in this example. So we're looking at 3 potential locations for putting this, and that's beside some of the larger pulp and paper mills and some of the sawmills in Sweden. So we can look at different kind of scenarios. So we look at capacity and scale, we look at truck and train, and some kind of seasonal variability and moisture and competitiveness. So looking at the location, we can now very fast adapt and look at, well, this will be the catchment area to create the facility in this area. In the first example, and we can see we have the road network really showing what kind of road access do we utilize and what kind of resources are available for us for this facility. And then we have another facility, which is a bit north, which has more greater access to forest residue in closer proximity. We can see that we have some holes within the catchment areas and the other one. And then we have another third one, which has a higher increase nearby, but less in the north. So we can create these quite quickly and adapt them and showcase what would be the difference between these kind of locations in terms of availability and feedstock. Another part is the scale and the opportunity of that. So we have the first example here with a smaller scale. What would happen if we increase the scale? Well, we still have access to availability, but now we're starting to limit ourselves with the transportation costs. So now we hit the roof that transportation costs will make it non-profitable to go further. Well, what would be the option now to be more and have more capacity? Well, we could access terminal trains and we can create this new network with the intermediate terminals actually delivering the supply to greatly increase the scale of the facility. And we can do this quite adaptively, changing the volumes, comparing prices with the different kind of transportation modes to really see what is the possibilities of doing it. The last one is sort of the competitive advantage, and that's when looking at a picture like this. Yeah, this is a very good, very nice. It's by itself. It has a lot of availability, but the reality is that we have competitors as well. Other people want to buy this product, so we have to take that into account. So we can create sort of the scenarios of looking at, well, during a low season, this could be the potential that we can actually be profitable because the other competitors, which is the bioenergy plant creating heat, they're not very interested in the product during summer. But as that increases during winter, we can see that they're paying much more than us for the winter period. That means that we have to go further, making it perhaps less profitable. So we can make an analysis on that, looking at, well, if we would perhaps utilize train with the same kind of volume, we could be more profitable because we can compare it to the competitors in the surrounding. We don't have to compete with them in the close proximity in this kind of area. So to summarize, what we've done in the FlexSNG project is that we have developed a tool that can really sort of evaluate the different aspects of the supply chain, looking at what would be the key aspects of having that flexible and integrated value chain and looking at investing in big biomass projects. We can also include the aspects of looking at what would be the end-to-end value chain and feedstock to deliver the product, because we can have the pricing and we can have the availability and the size of the feedstock. And we can also co-handle these different kind of feedstocks as well, including quality and moisture level about the feedstock. That is me. Thank you.
People are thinking about their questions. You can handle it well, but agricultural comes once or maybe twice a year.
Yeah.
And you're optimizing with that in mind. How do you go about doing that in a broad sense?
So we have to take into account sort of the inventory level. What are our capacities during the time period? And what we've seen that when we've done projects like this before is that we see that there's a possibility of utilizing agro biomass and stockpiling forest residues, because forest residues becomes quite competitive and quite expensive during winter periods when the demand is very high. So that's something that we can see, that you can utilize agro biomass directly and stockpile forest residues during those kind of low intensive periods when agriculture is more heavily compatible.
That'd be cost minimization. Can you couple that with the desire to feed a constant mixture into the gasifier that would rather run with it?
Of course, we can take it into account if that's something you want to sort of leverage, having that kind of same mixture over the time. Of course, that's something that we can add. But as I mentioned before, we have the possibility of comparing that to another strict where we only have 1 and 1.
Super. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.
So we've gone through the FlexSNG technology at large. We've talked about lowering the cost of biomass, and now we're going to get into that quirky thing about these processes, which is catalysts and syngas. and we have Dr. Andrew Steele of Johnson Matthey to talk about that. Andrew is a principal scientist who's been with Johnson Matthey since 2001. His background is in heterogeneous catalysis and reactor engineering, with a particular interest in step-out technologies for syngas production. And within the FlexSNG project itself, Johnson Matthey's been evaluating technologies for syngas generation via waste gasification, involving especially reforming catalysts and syngas purification materials, which are critical to that increase in yield. So, and Andrew's one of those guys, you know, if you say in a meeting, you know, the temperature's too high or something happened, do you know what another catalyst would be to do that? And he goes, oh yeah. So I think the floor is yours now.
Thank you, everybody. Pleasure to be here in person. So I work for Johnson Matthey. So first of all, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction of what the company is for those of you who don't know. So we're over 200 years old. We just recently celebrated our 200th anniversary. And we work in lots of areas, and I'll tell you about those later on. In those areas, we aim to be number 1 or number 2 in those areas. In the last year, our turnover was just over 4 billion. That excludes precious metals, because precious metals, as we all know, are very expensive. That skews our numbers. And we are currently about 13,000 employees, and that's worldwide. So if I go into a bit more detail, we have got 4 main areas. And for this, we're a business to business generally, so you may not have heard of all our technology, but if you own a car, we invented the technology for the catalytic converter. So 1 in 3 cars contains our technology. And we also do a lot of work on particle filters for heavy duty diesels, big trucks, emission controls for static things. The area I'm going to talk most about today is our catalyst technologies. So this is to do with the syngas, which I'll tell you more about, but things like edible oils, hydrogen generation, ammonia, methanol, these type of areas. And our third pillar is hydrogen technologies. So we've been doing fuel cells for a long time in the UK. And more recently, based on that, we've started doing electrolyzer technology, which is almost the reverse of fuel cells. And we see that as a huge future area. And underpinning all this is our precious metals. So this is metals like platinum, iridium, palladium. We're one of the largest refiners of these, and the technology that goes into most of these technologies. So we work a lot with our customers and partners, and we share the technology capabilities. So as we heard earlier on today, and we're all aware of, the climate is changing, and all of us are affected by that. There's a lot of resource scarcity and also energy insecurity. So our number 1 priority is to lead the transition to net zero and to protect the people and planet. So I won't dwell too much on that, but it's a very important message, and I think we all appreciate that. So, and how we're going to do this is we're a global leader in sustainable technologies, and we work with a lot of the main energy companies, chemical companies, and automotive companies, and they depend on us to help provide catalysts and processes to help them decarbonize the system, as I mentioned earlier on, to reduce the harmful emissions and ultimately achieve their sustainability goals. So the chemical industry is very carbon intensive, and 96% of all the manufactured products rely on chemicals. So this is foods, dyes, all the things around us require chemicals. So, and this demand is expected to grow by 25% by 2030. So we've got to do some more to do this. And ultimately, the chemical industry is one of the biggest producers of carbon dioxide, which is, as we know, bad for the environment. And approximately 18% of the emissions come from this sector. So we're doing our bit to reduce these down. So currently, if we look at carbon feedstocks. Currently, on the left-hand side, you can see that we're about 88% of our stuff comes from fossil fuels, and that's because fossil fuels are abundant and relatively cheap. At the minute, there's a very limited bio-based economy, but if we look forward 30 years to 2050, the scenario planners predict even with a modest growth of 2.5%, we're going to have a large demand, almost double for the amount we're going to need for our biowaste. So where is that going to come from? So if we assume that fossil fuels we're going to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, as everybody hoped, there's a maximum of 20% that really can come from bio-based. There's a limit to how much you can harvest biofood. And also you don't want to, some of it gets used for food. So that's obviously not going to be acceptable. So the limit is about 20%. So this then gives us what do we do? So 25% is predicted to come from carbon dioxide, and that's direct air capture or using CO2 from waste streams, industrial processes, and then you can capture that. But obviously for hydrocarbons, you need carbon and hydrogen. So to use that CO2, we need to get some hydrogen. And I've already talked about electrolyzers as being one possibility. And we predict we're going to need 140 million tons of green hydrogen. So not an insignificant amount of, and that will have to come from electrolysis probably. So a lot there. And the final sector is recycling. So that is using what we've got already. And hopefully by doing that, we will be in good shape for the future. So the next two slides are going to talk about syngas, which is what the main focus of this talk is. Currently, as I said, fossil fuels are the main source of this. And traditionally, you can take things like coal, natural gas, oil, things we're all familiar with, and put some process through that. Generally, steam reforming is the main process where we convert them. That's energy intensive, and it produces hydrogen, a mixture of hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide, which then can be used to produce all these value-added chemicals, which we all are so critical for our lifestyles. A lot of these are industrial and consumer applications. So we've got paints, polymers, woods, fertilizers, and then we've got transport fuels. And these are sort of the traditional transport fuels. So these are not going through a syngas route. This is just purely fuels for cars and trains and buses and planes. So if we step forward, this is what the future could look like. So we become less heavily dependent on the natural fuels, coals and natural gas, and we become reliant on more sustainable feedstocks. And we've talked a lot today about biomass, wastes. We're also added into this capturing the CO2 and then renewable energy. And if we use Johnson Matthey's technology and expertise in engineering and flow sheet coupled with syngas, then we can go through to many of these processes. And I'm going to tell you about some of these processes today, but they've all handily got names. So to get through to sustainable aviation fuel, we can use the process of Hycogen and FT cans. And also we've got another process there called eMerald, which is bring us through to methanol. And I'll tell you a bit more about these processes in a minute. Obviously, it's not the whole process because you can also produce things by non-syngas routes. So an example is the bioforming process, which earlier on we heard about the plane that went across the Atlantic, the Virgin Atlantic flight. That was made by a non-thermochemical route. So as I mentioned, Johnson Matthey is a catalyst company, which I'm involved in, and we're also an engineering company. So by putting these two things together, we can help our customers optimize their processes. So as I promised, some of the details here. So currently, a lot of these processes involve the water gas shift reaction, this is an equilibrium reaction. If you look on the right-hand side of the equation, if you put water and carbon monoxide there, you can create carbon dioxide. So normally Normally you want to produce more hydrogen and carbon monoxide. So by tailoring these ratios, you can then optimize what you want. So in this case, we are taking captured CO2 and adding hydrogen to it, and that is producing more carbon monoxide. And with that, then you can tailor the ratio of CO to hydrogen, which is what you need to tailor your Fischer-Tropsch reaction to get the right portion of the right chain length of carbons. So the water gas shift reaction is quite easy. The reverse water gas shift is much harder, and it must be done at a very high temperature. And there are lots of challenges with that. But over the years, Johnson Matthey's been involved in lots of these engineering solutions, and we've now got a process which does that. To give you an example, this process has to happen at sort of maybe 1200 degrees. And then in the reactor, you're going to have a lot of reactions with the stainless steel tube. You get corrosion, you get metal dusting, and you're adding oxygen in there. So there's a lot of problems in the process, and it's very challenging for the catalyst, but we've now got a system for that. So the FT cans is a development we've made with BP, the oil company, and this allows us to transform the syngas into hydrocarbon fuels. And where the innovation here is the reactor design, and I'll show you the reactor design in a minute. But this is a step change technology, and by taking the carbon monoxide and the hydrogen, you can build up a chain. And this is a predictable route. You can build up certain chains. But one of the things you need to do is keep the temperature very controlled, because otherwise you get a different variation of reactions. And you can also then, by doing that, you can reduce the costs, you can increase the productivity, and also you can then start thinking about adding the glycogen into that to help you tailor the process. And I'll show you in a minute some of that. So this is what the can looks like. If you imagine, these cans are not much bigger than a Coca-Cola can. What the gas comes in, the hydrogen and CO comes in at the top, the blue lines. Then you got radial flow across where the catalyst is, and then the gas goes down the outside of the can, and it's cooled. And that's the key bit. You can control the temperature, because you really want a very, very tight control of the temperature. You want just a few degrees, and that keeps the transfer very well, and it keeps the control of it's an exothermic reaction, and it keeps the control of that. So then you can get an increase in productivity 3 times. You decrease your capex because these are small reactors, and you also get a much higher productivity of the C5, which is the length of the chain you want, because you can manage to control that that process. So this is an example of a license we've signed recently. So Repsol in Spain and Saudi Aramco have got a process for sustainable aviation fuel. They capture carbon dioxide from their plant, and they add renewable hydrogen, which is created by wind. They use our hydrogen technology to convert the CO2 into syngas, and then they use the CANS reactor to make the synthetic crude. And from that, you produce a significant sustainable aviation fuel. And currently, the plant in Bilbao is producing 2,100 tons of this a year. So that's a good success story. An example now of more sort of, this is a bit further ahead now. This is this is e-methanol, so we're using electricity, which is where everything seems to be going these days. So in this case, you're taking hydrogen and captured CO2, and you're producing methanol, which can be used for, I heard earlier about for using for maritime applications, but also could then be transferred on to make Fischer-Tropsch. And a byproduct, the only byproduct is water, which is good, but also it means it's very challenging because you have the catalyst is surrounded by lots of water. So it's quite a challenge for the catalyst. We've had to develop new catalysts for that, because our standard methanol catalyst wouldn't survive in these atmospheres. This has been proved a technology, and we can also generate very high carbon efficiencies. There's a recycle loop here, and that helps to control the temperature. In all these processes, temperature is the key thing. You need to keep the temperature controlled. And as I said, it's quite a hard, challenging environment. And all these new applications seem to be fairly challenging for the catalyst, but we've now managed to get a 4-year lifetime, which is acceptable, which is it's good. So an example of where this technology has been applied. So the HIF Global Sustainable Aviation Fuel, this is a process with Honeywell as well. So the leaders are HIF Global. They've are doing an engineering study on this. They've got the recycled carbon dioxide, renewable hydrogen. They put this into the reactor, produce the methanol, and then they're using Honeywell's technology in this case to then produce the SAF fuel. So another route to SAF. So as we heard earlier on, we're going to need different ways of doing this. No one solution is going to be the winner, but there's going to be a mixture of them. And this is a good one. So in terms of, I've shown you some examples of commercial things. Before, these are all sort of near term. Going further forward, we need research as well. So as a company, we team up with other research organizations and universities to try and leverage all the different skills that we don't have and other universities and companies have. So I'll give you an example of 2 of them. So we've got it's called the Prosperity Partnership, and this is funded by the British government and sponsored by BP, Cardiff and Manchester. And this is another example of converting carbon dioxide, which seems to be the key thing here, waste and biomass, and then producing sustainable aviation and other sustainable fuels. And the next one is called Flutachem. And this is led by Unilever, the large chemical company. It's got Procter & Gamble, lots of companies working together. I think this is the key point. None of these things, and the other speakers mentioned this earlier on, you can't do this in isolation. You need lots of companies doing this. So in this particular case, they're transforming waste carbon dioxide into surfactants, so long chain value-added chemicals. So this seems to be the thing, is to be able to take carbon dioxide and turn it into something value. So my 3 take-home messages from this talk are the chemical industry needs to pivot away from fossil fuels and using more sustainable feedstock. So obviously within FlexSNG, we've been looking at biomass, and increasingly we're looking at using waste because they're much cheaper, but that obviously creates challenges for the catalyst. And in terms of, we talked about the tars and also the sulfurs. So we've either got to create catalysts which can cope with that, or we've got to have purification trains. But obviously this is all going to add cost to it. But ultimately, it's the way we have to go. So we have to develop these catalysts. I've shown that syngas is a great gateway to sustainable chemicals and feedstocks. Obviously, we need to make more of them because the challenges are large. So once these first of kind plants are demonstrated, then we can produce more, and they'll become very popular. And obviously, it's a combination of catalyst and process engineering that's required in all these cases. It can't be just one or the other. Okay. Hello.
Hi, Panise Palvanlu, Natural Resources Canada. A question about using different biomass feedstocks. Do you find that your different catalysts, like, are there different impurities in different feedstocks that, you know, are more of a challenge? How do you deal with that from a catalysis perspective? Thanks.
So traditionally, our catalysts in the traditional syngas route, they have very, very low tolerances to catalysts. So you normally talk about parts per billion, parts per billion, and they have a lifetime. But with these new challenges, they tend to need, we're going to have much higher levels. I mean, some of these feedstocks, we're talking about 1% sulfur in them, huge, really, really big. So that's why as a company, we're very keen to demonstrate these, especially at pilot scale. It has to be done at pilot scale. And what we've been looking at is if you can get the temperature hot enough in the reactor, then a lot of this poisons just keep moving through the system. and that's really good. But what we need is time on stream, because it's very easy to demonstrate a catalyst works for 1 hour, 10 hours in a lab, but actually working on a pilot scale for hundreds of hours, thousands of hours a year, it's very challenging. But what we've been doing in FlexCheck is we've been taking the catalysts afterwards. We've been putting them in different parts of the bed. We take them out and we analyze them, characterize them to see where the chemicals are. And so far the results have been good. We don't see any coking, which is a traditional method. Carbon laydown is very traditionally poisons these catalysts. But I think because the temperature is so high and we've got hydrogen there, it seems to work. But sulfur tends to tends to move through the systems. But we think chlorine might be a challenge. We're also silicon. So yeah, it is a harsh environment. So I think realistically we'll have to change the catalyst more often. But obviously that's the catalytic solution. Other people are looking at POC systems where you don't have a catalyst in it. So
Michael Paleolog, WF Innovations. What I wanted to ask you is how advanced are we in the reaction between carbon dioxide and hydrogen to produce methanol? We have plenty of carbon dioxide around, right? We can easily produce hydrogen using electrolysis, say. How cost effective is the technology today?
I believe it is. I believe it is cost effective. I haven't got the numbers with me, but I believe it's yes. I mean, I guess there may be some subsidies available at the minute, but I think it has to ultimately it has to survive on its own. Okay.
So in such a case, do we need to go the gasification route? We have plenty of sources of carbon dioxide and easily produce hydrogen and oxygen.
I guess it's to do with the scales. I don't think these scales are massive, so it's at the minute. I think it's still sort of demonstration. I think at this stage, I don't think it's. I mean, if you look at a methanol plant, a world-scale methanol plant, I mean, they're hundreds of orders of magnitude bigger than this. This is still quite small. So to produce the amount of methanol, we're going to need lots of these plants. But I think ultimately it needs to scale up. So I think it's cost effective at the minute, but are we taking into play all the parameters? We're not costing it completely. It depends how much the people are willing to pay for it, because it's a different product in a way. It's because it's been made by a renewable route, you can charge a bit more for it. So it's ultimately people want the cheaper fuel. So it's going to have to, the cost will have to come down more, I think.
Thank you.
It's a sort of premium. It's a sort of premium thing. It's a bit like the sustainable aviation fuel. Anything you make now will go into the process, but is it the same price? It's not quite there yet. And obviously, if you make it bigger, then the price will come down. So I think my answer is it's not cheap enough yet, but it's.
Thank you.
Follows on from the first question asked, which is it a simple task to design catalysts that would take variable feedstock? So the idea of variable feedstocks is great for a lower feedstock cost. What does it mean to the catalyst?
In terms of the poison, I mean, if you poison the catalyst, it depends whether the poison is transient or whether if it blocks a site and sticks there forever. So if you poison the catalyst for a while with a heavy feedstock and then you switch to a cleaner fuel, it may be able to clean itself. It really depends on the poison. We've looked mostly at sulfur, and sulfur at high temperature, sulfur is transient. So you get an equilibrium built up with the amount of sulfur on the surface, and when you take that sulfur out and you keep the temperature, it'll come off. But there's a lot we don't know about the poisons, but. The good thing about the FlexSNG, if we haven't seen any carbon, that would be a very traditional route for carbon for killing the catalyst. But in this case, we don't see that. So
for something like sulfur, you would design for a certain amount of time in a campaign before the catalyst starts to have lower performance, and then you want to switch over. That could even be the design criterion.
Yes, I've considered that. I mean, ultimately, if the sulfur was too high, you might want to take it out beforehand. But then the problem with that is you have to cool the gas down and heat it up, and heat it up again, and that's not very efficient. So that's why we are considering putting everything through the catalyst. But that's challenging, because the catalyst doesn't. It is a catalyst. It doesn't want
time is up. Thank you very much, Andrew. So a few minutes for a coffee, I think. Is there a coffee break right now? Yeah. And then we come back at 10:30 to have a really interesting panel discussion. And so I think don't worry about it. Okay, so you're forming things that benchmark and you get -3%, you get -20%. And so if you want to look at stronger shareholders, they're not going to invest in Israel. It's like that's so you'll see that email. And I'm just going to respond. But you sort of give us 1 hour brainstorm. Afterwards, I'll say, well, what are some that be really strong? So, yes. Oh, because we're going to be understanding here. And okay, yes. And if you comes up here, I'm not even looking at this, there's no questions. So if there is, do this or something. Okay, that's so you know, because this is being adjusted to listen speakers. So before I was doing this, looking at it, then Sash came in here. I said, I don't know. It's not a concession. It's working. And chair it's more being live as well. Yeah. You could put up the discussion. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you very much. It's a big project. So that's a big challenge. Not the idea there. Model I like which century. It's got 3 to 6 weeks. Which is very challenging. So it's just different. We've got if you actually get you know what's those you didn't want to sell you could say you know one time it's these very structured. So I said it's other structure of this I think in that means the process of organized the actual but also so you said so